Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Mirror Talk. I really appreciate the fact that we were able to, organize this whole interview, this whole conversation, and everything worked out perfectly well. Thank you so much for making out the time to speak to me today. As we said before we started recording, I'm so fascinated by your story, and I would love to learn about your life journey so far. So is it possible for you to share this with me? What motivated you to move from Australia to the US in 1989?
At the age of about 20, I went through this mental transition of somebody who thought I had all the answers to the world, but I was a kid. I didn't know anything. And so that led into your own personal growth. I mean, I wanted to have the fast cars and the girlfriends and all that, but it was meaningless in the end because I realized that that didn't really make me happy either. So I ended up, I guess maybe about 2 or 3 years later, I went through that sort of typical, all right, I've done all of this. It's now getting repetitive and boring. So we sold the company. I wouldn't sell it for that much, but it was enough to, we as in myself and a business partner I had, we decided that was good. We, finished the end of that chapter in our lives and we wanted to do different things. So I ended up working for one of my clients who was a submarine manufacturer, and I got a secret clearance and I learned how submarines worked, and I wrote software for logistics and ship to shore stuff and that sort of thing. And I met a lot of people from all over the world who hailed from different countries. Our main prime contractor for the submarines were from Sweden. I met all of those guys. All of the guys who did our combat systems were from the United States. I met all them. And then the guys who did all of the physical steel making and so on were from Bath Iron Works in Maine and the US. So I made a lot of friends who were from all over the world. And a particular guy who was a really good mentor to me was a real luminary in the software business. He lived in Beverly Hills in California. And he always told me, he said, well, if you ever get a chance to come to the States, come and visit me and we'll take you out to dinner and we'll, that sort of thing. So I thought, oh, okay. I didn't really think much about it. Anyway, I got tired of this job. But, one thing about working for somebody is they give you vacation, right? I'd never had that before. I'd always been self-employed. I was working 7 days a week. I never took any time off. And all of a sudden I found myself with this job, with this idea, and I was bored out of my mind with it because I'd mastered everything I needed to do very early on. And then it was just like rinse and repeat, just repeat, it was so boring. So when I got eligible for a vacation, a buddy of mine said, hey, you want to go to Hawaii? And I said, yeah, get me out of here. So jump on a plane, I get my passport, I jump on a plane, I go to Hawaii, and we had a great time. I met this girl. Next thing you know, we really connected and fell in love. And I went back to Australia. She was living in California. And then I said, look, I'll come over and see you. So I did that. Maybe about 2 months later, I get back on a plane, I fly. It's like a 15-hour flight. It's a long flight. I get to California. She greets me at the airport. We, and one thing led to another, and we ended up getting married. And the weird thing about the United States when it comes to immigration is that if you change your status, like I came in as a tourist on like a tourist visa, if you get married and you change your status and you're now going to petition for permanent residency, or at least you're even just having that change, now you can't leave, right? If you leave, everything stops and it might be you're 2 years out of the country before they let you back in because you've got to do all of the immigration work outside of the US, and it doesn't happen very quickly. So I knew I was stuck there. So we got an attorney and I got the immigration thing going. And next thing you know, eventually I got my green card and I was able to live and work there. But there was about 6 months of time in that period where I couldn't work. And for somebody who had spent all of my time working, like I knew no other way of living life. it was really hard. So I ended up saying, well, I'm in Los Angeles. Now, when I was 5 years old, my mother stuck a violin under my chin and said, kid, you're going to learn to be a musician. And I did that probably just to keep her happy. But by the age of 11, I was in the Junior Symphony Orchestra in South Australia. So I had a lot of experience in music, and that ended up turning into playing classical guitar, that then turned into electric guitar. And then I was playing in bands in Australia, you know, as sort of a pastime. But I was pretty decent at it. And I thought, well, maybe that's what I'll do for the next 6 months of my life in LA. I'll go into Hollywood and try and be a rock star. So I did that while I'm waiting for this work permit to come about. I did that and joined some bands and got to know a lot of people, and we had a little bit of success over the years. But in the whole process of doing it, I got to know the inside of that world, which is kind of strange. But then eventually I did get my work permit. And once I got that, I put on a suit and jumped in this beat up old car I managed to cobble together. Because when I went to the States, I didn't have any money. I went there with a bag of clothes. So I find myself driving all around these LA freeways, not knowing where I'm going. Before the age of GPSs and Google Maps, I'm like, oh, okay, I've got to work out how to get there. I go to these big companies, I get an interview, and they look at me and they go, right, so you've done all of this amazing stuff, so you say, but you don't have a degree. I'm like, well, of course I don't have a degree. Before I would even get a degree, I did all this stuff. Plus, there was nobody teaching these courses. I could teach these courses. And they're like, yeah, but, you know, our HR department want to make sure everyone's got a degree. So sorry, out. This happened 20 times. 20. Yeah. Every single time I go in for an interview, they'd go, no degree, get out. I was so frustrated. And one day I went into this startup, and the startups in California are like somebody's big idea, or a few people, and maybe they got some venture capital money or something, but they're starting up, right? They don't really have much to offer new employees. I ended up in this, it was like a mobile trailer on a construction lot, because these guys were building their buildings. So I walked into this trailer and, you know, with my suit on and trying to look really, you know, job worthy. And I go into this kind of office-y thing, and they're interviewing me, and they're looking at me going, he's not going to want a job here because look at us, we're in a trailer. And I'm looking at them on the other side of the table, right? I'm going, they're just going to say no because they don't have a degree. And they said, no, it's not a problem for us. And I'm like, well, it's not a problem for me either. We got a deal. So I got my first job. Well, I didn't realize that job was a startup that became something. That was Amgen, the world's largest biotechnology corporation now. And months after I took the job, they got approval for their first product. It was a drug that, of all things, it was called Epogen. And it was most notorious because everybody on the Tour de France were injecting it as a steroid to, you know, so this is the whole Lance Armstrong story. Well, that was our product. We didn't ever have the indication for that. We were not approved to sell it, but somehow in the black market, people were getting our product and they were using it as a steroid. It was actually intended to help people who are on dialysis. But anyway, it was this wonder drug, and all of a sudden, all of the early guys like me and all my friends who were there became kind of instant millionaires. We didn't expect it. They just gave you this big stock option thing as an incentive for you to work for them, because after all, who would work for a company that's in a trailer, right? So they had to give you something. I just didn't realize it was a lottery ticket, and I won the lottery. So for years, I was just working there, what they call vesting your options, or your options just kind of, you know, invest, and eventually you get every year on your anniversary, you get a big block of these things coming in. So it was financially, you wouldn't leave. But about 5 years after I started, I got a phone call back from Australia that my mother had a car accident And I had to go back to Australia to see what was going on. So I jumped on a plane and flew all the way back and found her in hospital, and she had early stage dementia. I didn't realize it until I got there. And then all of a sudden I was on the phone calling my wife in California to say, I got to come home. I got to move here. You want to come back? And she's like, yeah, all right. So I said, okay. So we sold the house and the cars and quit my job and took this big payload of money from Amgen and moved to Australia, bought a house there and set up a life. And 3 or 4 months later, she said, this isn't working for me. I'm out of here. And we got a divorce. So that was kind of weird because I was 32 years old. So I'd gone from this kid from nothing who just through sheer perseverance made something of himself very early on in life, but not because of what I did. It was because, yes, what I knew and what I could do and what I did for the company were very, very important in their early days. But it wasn't worthy of $1 million payout in my mind. I didn't think I earned it. So this money came in and it didn't have any history, you know. I thought I knew it all, right? I thought at that age I had all the answers. Look at this, I'm 32 years old. I'm retired. I'm a millionaire. Wow. What did that mean? Nothing. My wife certainly didn't think it meant anything because she divorced me. And then shortly after that, I was kind of in a pretty dark and depressed place because, I mean, when you divorce, you lose half the money, so that's gone. And then the rest of the money went into buying this big house that we had, and now I'm the only one living in it, so I'm wondering what that was all about. But it was, I remember it was towards the end of the year, it was like in a Christmas time, and some friends of mine had said, you know, because I was pretty depressed, they'd said, listen, you need to come with us on a road trip. We're going to go to Queensland, which is on the other side of the country. We're going to hit the beaches, going to have a good time for New Year's Eve. You don't need to be sitting around here dark and miserable. So I said, whatever, I've got nothing else to do. So we jumped in the car, drove up there. We did all that stuff. We're coming back. It's a 2-day drive. On the second day of the trip, my buddy's driving. I'm in the back seat of the car. He goes over this we're in the outback, so we're in very, you know, there's nothing out there. He goes over this rise on the road, and on the other side, splash. I'm like, what? This is desert. There's no water. Splash. Well, I didn't realize it, but there was a flash flood. And we get those here in Arizona where I live right now. Flash floods are horrible. They just, with no warning, this water just whoosh, straight through. And it wiped out the road, and he hit it at maybe 80 mile an hour, maybe 120 clicks, something like that. Fast. Yeah. So when you hit that, car skips like a rock over water, and he ended up head on into a car coming in the opposite direction. His girlfriend was in the passenger seat next to him. She was killed. I was in a coma. He walked away from it okay. They ended up pulling me out of the car and airlifting me eventually to our home city, and I found myself in hospital. I was in hospital for about 6 weeks, completely shattered my entire shoulder and arm. I still had the use of my fingers, which was good. I broke everything from like the waist down on the right side of my body, all the way down was broken. The everything, the knee, the bones, everything just shattered. And they kind of had to put me back together again. I was kind of lucky I survived it. And they did that, but the Australian medical system was really bad. And what I mean by that is they're very, very limited in money, and they don't have enough beds. So when they put you in hospital, you're in a room with 8 other people. It's pretty nasty. And so they patched me up and made sure I wasn't going to die on them. But then they kicked me out and sent me home. And I'm like, hang on, I can't walk and I've got one arm. What are we doing here? Well, as I found out, the parents of the girl who died in the car, who was next to my buddy, they were obviously distraught. I mean, you'd expect that. But they were taking all of their anger and their frustration out on him. And so they managed to convince some district attorney to charge him with negligent homicide. And I was in the back of the car, and he didn't do anything wrong. He did nothing wrong. It was an accident. Accidents happen. I mean, force majeure. It's a flash flood, act of God. I mean, how is he responsible for that? But because they implemented these charges, the government stopped paying anything on the insurance. And so there was no medical treatment for me. I was left out on my own. And so I had to take care of myself. So I had to pay for all of my own medical care, which was extremely expensive. Then I had to hire an attorney to represent me so that I could get them to eventually pay their bills. That took 8 years. By then, I was broke. All my money was gone. Everything that this gift from being in California was just gone, like instantly. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, things getting real again. Now I'm disabled and I've still got to try and survive. So I ended up, I met another girl years later. We got married. We had a daughter. And then one day in about 1999, I got a phone call from one of the guys I used to work with at Amgen, one of the original guys, good friend of mine. And he said, listen, we need you over here because there's this thing called the dot-com boom, and we need your techniques and skills. And, you know, he knew what I could do because I worked alongside of him for years. And so I said, yeah, put me on a plane, buddy. I'm out of here. So we did that. And I remember I got to California and I eventually got there and started working. And I called my wife back in Australia and I said, listen, by now my mother had passed away. She wasn't really there anymore. So I was free, but I had no money. I had no resources. And I was bored out of my skull in Australia because there was really nothing for me to do. I had the reverse problem going back. Because of all the experience I had in the States, I was now overqualified for everything in my hometown. So it became a threat to everybody. It's like they didn't want to employ me because it would make them look bad because I'd already done all these crazy things and I was kind of one of the early guys, founders, pioneers in the industry that these guys out of college, out of university, they wanted to, that was their business now, right? How dare I go in there and tell them how to program or tell them how to do their job? I mean, what was I, 35 or something? I mean, for me, I was an old man compared to them. So I couldn't get any traction finding work there either. I mean, I did the odd bit of contract work, but that was about it. So when this opportunity came, I got back. So I went there, I called my wife and I said, you and our daughter, get on a plane, come over here. You've got to see what's going on. There's so much money flying around. I can actually be a responsible husband, a responsible father again, and try to feed my family. So we did. So they come over, they agreed with my assessment and said, all right, well, what if we stay here for 12 months? Maybe we'll do like a 12-month contract of work. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I did that. After 12 months, I realized there was no sense in going back to Australia. So now we buy a house in California. I've got this work. Everything's looking good. I need to sell my house in Australia because I still kept that. So I sold that. I used that money to help fund the American house. And when we went back and we were doing this, we noticed there was this thing going on in Australia, which was like this resource boom. China had entered the World Trade Organization at that time. And all of a sudden they needed everything that Australians could dig out of the ground, particularly iron ore, steel, bauxite, aluminum, liquid natural gas. And then eventually they had to feed their 1.5 billion people. So they needed wheat and they needed corn and animals, lamb, beef, seafood. They needed everything Australians had this massive bounty of. And so Australia started selling it to China, and China just kept buying and kept buying. And there was all this money going back into Australia, and all of a sudden people's real estate properties, doubled, tripled. And we saw this coming. We said, well, maybe we need to take some of this extra money we'd earned in the States and buy some properties there. So we did that. Smart move. Properties tripled in value. And by 2005, we started doing the exact same thing in the States. And my contract in California ended. I moved to Arizona. It was cheaper to live here, and we kind of liked the vibe of the place. And so we bought a place here, and we started buying rental properties in Arizona, and they doubled in value. And I was like, holy cow. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there with the spreadsheet, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm a millionaire again. Right? But this time, it was like, I didn't get a bunch of stock options, right? I had to put my own money on the table, money I earned, and I had to invest it. I had to take risks, and I had to own the risk. And so when that happened, it was like, oh, I deserve it this time, right? Because I always on the back of my mind, I was like, if I'd made all this money for doing nothing or having no real wisdom, or it was just by circumstance or by luck, I didn't deserve it, right? And a lot of very wealthy people who fall into money, whether it be by way of inheritance or they bought the right stocks at the right time or they bought cryptocurrency or whatever, and they're all patting themselves on the back going, look at me, I'm successful, I'm a rich guy. They all know deep down they don't deserve it, right? And I'm not saying they're all that way, but only those that went into something assuming risk and put their own skin in the game really have the right to say, I deserve the fruits of what I've got. I mean, that's how I was raised. Australians, the buck stops on our desk. And I think a lot of that comes from being on an island all the way down the other end of the planet. And there's nobody out there that's going to help you out. And you're surrounded by every insect that'll kill you, or every snake that'll kill you, or sharks in the ocean that'll kill you. And there's a lot of personal responsibility that's in our id, it's in our DNA. And that, I think, was my disconnect between a life where I had to earn everything and take responsibility for everything to this world in California where it was like, money, here, have it. So I didn't feel, it wasn't deserved. So when I did make my money on my own, yes, that was deserved. So I was very happy in the early 2000s. And then 2008 came, the global financial crash. And a lot of the real estate that I had was leveraged. I'd used bank finance, and I had maybe a 50% financing to 50% of my own money. And immediately the properties lost 75% of their value. And I was upside down, I was underwater. And again, I went from $1 million to zero. So at this point, I'm going, well, okay, I've been down this road before. And it's not as bad as it was that first time. And you know what? I almost got killed. I almost lost everything. I lost everything. I mean, you took it all away. And I survived and I came back. So I know I can get past. If I can get through that, I can get through anything. So I'm at this point going, right, let's fix this problem. So I still had these properties in Australia. And Australia was still going through this resource boom, right? So I sold them, and then I brought the money over and I settled all of the upside down properties I had in the States. So I was no longer in danger. The banks weren't looking for me all the time. I could service everything that was there. And I still had a lot of money left over. And I realized that the one thing that really worked for me in the States was being what I would call a contrarian. And that is, if everybody is going that way, I go the opposite, right? If everybody wants to buy that stock, I'm out, right? I do the polar opposite of what I call the herd, the mass population tends to do, because I know that even though they might get some positive reward for doing that, I'm going to share in the bounty with millions of other people, and my share is going to be minuscule, right? But if I do the polar opposite, where there's only me and a few other guys doing it and we win, we get to keep the whole thing. And that's kind of the mindset of the contrarian. So what I did when everybody else was like, oh my God, the sky's falling and we're all going to die and property's going in the toilet, and I'm sitting there with this bundle of cash going, right, I'll buy that, I'll buy that, I'll buy that, but I'll buy it at 10 cents on the dollar. Now, I realized that somebody would not sell their property for a tenth of its value. They wouldn't. But what if the bank had already foreclosed it and the bank were trying to dump them out at an auction because they couldn't keep them on their books? So I found out where all these foreclosure auctions were, and I would literally go to the courthouse or whatever. They're often outside in these town squares with this guy with a 10-gallon cowboy hat on and a clipboard going, all right, I've got this property, who wants it? It's like an auction. And I'm like, I'll give you that for it. Sold. Next, I'll give you that. Sold. And I bought a street of properties, and I bought them really, really cheap. So then my wife and I said, okay, well, we're going to clean them up and we're going to rent them out, and this is going to be what we do. And that's what I did from 2009, 2010, all the way through to about 2011. And then they were all put online, fully tenanted. And then the economy started to come back. And all of a sudden, the properties went up and up and up in value. Well, today, which is 10 years later, a property that I bought back in those days for, say, $75,000 US, I just got two of them valued by a professional valuation service, and they're worth $700,000 US, 10 times. So the money that I'd made in the early days after I recovered from nothing went up 10 times in value. And all of a sudden I became a multi-millionaire. And again, because I had the courage to do the polar opposite of what everybody else had told me. Now, meanwhile, my daughter has grown, right? She's now gone to college and she graduates, and I find myself at a dinner in Tucson, Arizona, which is where her university was. And I think it was her 21st birthday. So she hadn't quite graduated. So we put on this big dinner thing for her and maybe a dozen of her close friends from college at this really cool Mexican restaurant. And so they're all there, and I'm sitting at the end of the table, and just talking to her friends. I'm like, "What are you going to do when you leave college?" Conversation. I don't know. I'm studying chemical engineering, but I hate it. I'm like, well, why did you do that? I don't know. My parents told me to. Like, dude, did you? And then I find out 85% of them have got student loan debt. In other words, they've got student loans that were equal to the value of a house in the United States that they have to pay off for going to university to do a course they didn't even want to do. So this conversation's going on and on and on. And eventually they come back to me and, well, what did you do? What did you study at college? I said, kid, I didn't go to college. What? I said, I didn't even finish high school. But you're the big rich guy with the Mercedes, and you're paying for this dinner, and how on earth did that happen? I said, well, because I didn't follow the social mantra. I didn't do what people told me to do. I did what I saw as being rational, pragmatic, decisive things, right? If somebody said to me, if you want to invest $100,000 into this education in which you will never want to do it, and you'll be very lucky to ever get that money back, would you do it? I was like, hell no. Of course I wouldn't. But this is what every 18-year-old in the United States is being told right now. And it's sad because there's $1.6 trillion of student loan debt sitting out on the books right now here, and none of these kids are ever going to get to pay it. And they can't escape the debt, even through bankruptcy. They're stuck and they have to pay it off. So that means that people who would normally be out there buying real estate at the age of, I know when I did, right? 25, 28, 30. Well, they can't because they're carrying around these student loans payments. They can't afford the mortgage. So until the student loan payments are paid off, they don't get a chance to start on the property ladder. So now property doesn't start for another 5 or 10 years. Well, if you're a landlord like I am, that's a win for me because I've got 5 more years of your rent making me rich. So I'm, of course, right? But for that kid who wants to start a family and wants to, do all of the things that I did, they don't get a chance at that, or at least they defer it for 5 or 10 years. Well, this is one of those things when you get older, you can see the totality of things, right? Whereas when I was 20, I could only see what I'd learned at that point in time. And it was enough for me to think that I knew all the answers. But it wasn't until I got older and I saw the totality of things that I realized that I'd never been through an adverse event yet in my life. I never had to bury a parent. I never had a divorce. I never was almost killed in a car accident. I'd never changed countries. I'd never had a daughter. I mean, I had no idea, right, back then. And yet I thought I did. And that was the arrogance of youth. It's okay. We all have to have arrogance of youth because that's how new things start, right? The problem is that you also have to have the wisdom of age. And if you don't marry the two together, the disconnect can be fatal. And what I was seeing was that these kids who couldn't get a house, they got a 30-year mortgage to buy the house when they were, say, 35. Well, if you do the math, that means if they just kept paying off their house, they'd be 65 years old before they would be not having to make a mortgage payment. But, I'm not sure if it's the same in your neck of the woods, but in America, people don't have much of a long-term patience level. They won't stay in the same house for 30 years. They'll sell it every 5. They'll move. The job in New York is calling them and they'll sell their house and they'll move to New York. I get it. I mean, I moved. And when they do that, they restart the clock. And so the whole concept of a mortgage is more true of its actual French translation, death contract, right? So if that is the nature of the mortgage, you realize it's a setup. It's a setup by banks to keep you paying them interest every single month until the day you die. In the same way that they did that scam on the students for the student loan debt, they're doing the same scam for mortgages. And I started to see all of this and I thought, none of this is helping humanity at all. None of this. People have a right to be free. They have a right to have no shackles upon them where they can travel where they want to go and that they can pursue whatever their passion is, that they have the right to be an artist without having to be a starving artist, or they have the right to be a builder or an engineer or a lawyer or whatever they want. They have the right to that. How do we have any ability to stop them doing that? And I started realizing that really the number one industry that stops people from fulfilling their dreams is the banking industry. So I started realizing that maybe I need to be my own bank. Maybe I need to break free of that.
Liquid IV is a category-winning hydration brand fueling your wellness. The hydration multiplier is the one product you are missing in your daily routine right now. In just one stick, you get 5 essential vitamins and twice faster hydration than water alone. Use it first thing in the morning, use it before a workout, use it when you feel run down, use it after a long night out, and use it on those very long flights. Get 20% off whatever you get on liquid-iv.com. Just use our promo code MirrorTalk at checkout. Visit our shops for more details. Links are available in the show notes of this episode. Tell me how your experience is with the Liquid IV hydration product. Thank you. But I find your story very fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying and I'm learning from, the up and down that you've experienced in life. That is what we need right now.
Well, it's also hard to say, oh, the answer is this, unless you can explain why the answer is this. And it's the story of what led to the answer that is where the key is. If you understand that story, the answer is just a natural punchline. It's the conclusion at the end of the joke, but it's the whole thing. Without the story, the punchline means nothing, right?
True.
And that's the key here. See, back in 2011, when the banks did the dirty on me and everybody else with this whole global financial crash, I started realizing that they were criminals to begin with. And it's only my life has kind of had that reaffirmed as I go forward. That finance and debt is an albatross around our necks that we need to not have. And if it means saying no or deferring things to later, so be it. It is not worth that. The shackles that until the day you die, you're signing a contract with the bank. I mean, it's not worth it. And in 2011, after the 2008 global financial crisis, and I saw the banks do what they did, where they stole people's homes and took people's hopes and dreams from them by force, because all of a sudden they said, well, that loan that we said was going to be this interest rate, yeah, well, we're actually raising it. It's now this, and yeah, I know you haven't got a job, but pay up or we're taking your house. Yeah. And they did. Millions and millions and millions of people lost their homes. And me, as somebody who was the contrarian, sat on the sidelines, I felt a bit like a vulture because I came in, swooped to pick it up. But if I didn't, that neighborhood would have been derelict. Somebody had to come in and buy those distressed assets and clean them up and get them back online. And so I took that on, and I was very well rewarded financially for doing that. But in the process of having this horrible relationship with banking, I was still doing some software work, contract work, that sort of thing. And I had a programmer who was working for me in a very interesting technological area. There weren't many people in the world that knew this particular area. And he lived in Bangladesh, so a poverty-stricken country that had so many negatives thrown at it because we were coming out of 10 years since 9/11. And in the United States, anybody Muslim back in those days we were cautious, right? And that was unfair. Now, I was an immigrant myself, so I didn't come to the United States with the same ideologies necessarily. Yeah. But what I did see was that there are good people in the world, regardless of what color they are, what country they're from, wherever it is, that we should be given our chances based on good that we do. And if we do bad, we have to own that too, right? Yes. And so this guy who became a good friend of mine who was in Bangladesh was programming, and I had to pay him. And the only way I could pay him, well, firstly, there was no PayPal because Bangladesh they had this, they weren't recognized by the United States on the same banking systems. So you couldn't inexpensively pay somebody there. So I'd go down to Western Union every 2 weeks, give him a bunch of cash. They'd wire or send him the money. He'd then go and collect it in Dakar and he'd have his money, but he'd lose 27% of every dollar that he made. And this is a country starving in poverty. He wasn't charging me that much money at all, but he was losing it all to these banksters, right? And I said, this is not fair. This is not right. There has to be a better way that I can pay you and that you can use that money to feed your family. Just as I have the right to do that for mine, you have the right to do it for yours. We've got to find a way. And we discovered Bitcoin. This was in 2011. I bought a ton of it because back in those days, the only way to buy Bitcoin was there was an exchange in Japan and I had to wire them money and it cost me like $75 to do a wire. So it made no sense to send them a couple of dollars for a Bitcoin. Bitcoin back then was $7 each. So I bought, a lot of it. And I had this in this exchange. And my idea was, well, I'll just pay him from this exchange all the time. The exchange was called Mt. Gox, Mount Gox. So I had all this money in Mount Gox, and then he was having a hard time converting it into his local currency in Bangladesh. And then we've discovered this mob out of Hong Kong that had like a MasterCard debit card that you could tie to a Bitcoin account. So I moved all of the Bitcoin over to them, and thank God I did because Mt. Gox got hacked and everybody's lost all their money. I got out before that. Then he could go to his local ATM machine and withdraw money in his local currency from his Bitcoin, and it worked. And for probably about 2 years, we did that. Well, the price of Bitcoin that I bought it at $7 went to like $1,200. Oh my God. It's insane. So maybe I won't pay him with that Bitcoin. Maybe I'll keep that. But we did that, eventually. But I kept it and I kept it and I kept it. And when I sold it, which was now in retrospect, it was stupid because Bitcoin's like $64,000 today. But when I sold it, it was significantly lower than that. But it was still almost 1,800 times what I paid for it. Wow. So at that point, I walked away with millions. And again, it was like, was this a win? Was this a lottery that I won? Was this real? Or was it fake? Was it, was I lucky? There's a bit of luck. But what made it so beautiful was to see what the banks had done to people and their homes and to realize I'm giving it to the banks. I'm telling the banks, you don't get this. You don't get to touch it. We've got an economy which is completely away from you, and that's the secret. The contrarian in me wanted to celebrate being opposite. And it worked. Now, today, it's a very different world. The entire banking industry, Wall Street, the investment banks pretty much own Bitcoin now. They are the reason it went to the highs that it went. So I don't really participate that much in it. But what I do realize is that when you put all of your faith and trust in a central authority, you get a very, very, very small share of what that authority is willing to dish out. It's why there's so much of a disparity between those that have a job and earn a salary and they don't see their salary going up at the rate of inflation, and they feel squeezed, particularly here in the US, because the central owners of the assets, of the wealth, are not going to give it out. And if they do, they'll give it out to a wide array of people who serve them, but at the minimum level they can. And to go into this world thinking that I'm going to go to university and study hard and get a job and work hard, and maybe at 65 I'll retire, it doesn't work. It worked in 1960. It worked in 1970. But since about maybe since the 70s, it hasn't worked at all. And the rate of job salary growth has not kept up in any way with the rate of costs. Case in point, in the United States, the salary rise since 1980 to 2020, I don't have current numbers for today, but to 2020 is about a 1.6 times. So back in 1980, if you earned $40,000 a year in a salary, in 2020 you'd earn 65, something like that. The cost of healthcare in this country from 1980, the cost per person of healthcare to 2020 has gone up 25 times in that period. So if somebody's expecting to pay for their hip replacement, good luck, they can't afford it in this country because their salary never went up at the rise of the cost of healthcare. Now, healthcare becomes health insurance in this country becomes the shackles that keeps the average American worker in that job, even though they know that A, they hate their job, and B, their job doesn't financially serve them. Yeah. But they can't leave because, God forbid, they have a car accident. They can't afford to go to hospital without losing everything. It's very precarious.
Yeah. That's really sad. I mean, your story is just wonderful, so beautiful. Like, I'm so grateful that you were able to, narrate the whole story, the whole journey, the ups and downs, like almost being killed, losing it all, being hospitalized and getting back your money, losing part of it and coming back, back to your feet and becoming the success that you are today. You've answered almost all my questions already, actually. Like, you narrating the story, I'm like, wow, I wanted to ask you that question. Like, I had that in mind while preparing for this podcast interview that I was going to ask you this. And you answered everything already. But one thing that I would love to know that you could maybe help us or advise us on is, for example, people that are in debt now, for example, like you said, student loans, for example, or people that are in a job that, they don't have that financial freedom and they have to be there because they need that health insurance, they need that, the benefits that comes with it. How can they, become financially free? How can they become debt free and become free from all, financial chains or shackles that could be holding them to that particular situation that they are in currently?
Okay, so that's kind of the punchline to the whole story.
Yes.
The first thing that you need to understand is that if you're selling your time by the hour, that is, you've got a job, you paid a wage, or you're paid by the hour or something. There's one of you. So you've got 40 hours or 50 hours or whatever number of hours of work that you can do per week. And that's the end of what you can earn. You can never earn any more than that. So realize that that's a loser's bet. You can't work that way unless your rate per hour is so high, like you're a specialist cancer surgeon or something. Yeah, okay, maybe there you can. But for the average person, it's not going to work. The secret is to buy assets. That is, to own physical assets that pay you to own them. And there are many of those things out there, but the one that's most easy to understand is rental real estate. If you buy a piece of property, then you own that property, that title to that property, even though you might have only put 20% of the money down and the bank mortgaged the rest. That 20% investment, you're going to get a return on 100% of the value of that property as that property increases in value. So if you look at the rate of increase and you study this over time, you'll see that the average rate of property appreciation is about 4%. Now, it varies based on type of property, location. There's a lot of, details in there, but for the most part, 4%. So let's say you put 20,000, let's say you put 50,000 euro down and you bought a $250,000 piece of property. Let's make it easier. $200,000 piece of property, 200,000 euro piece of property. Well, if that's going up at 4% per year, that means you're making approximately 8,000 euros per year in appreciation. If you look at that as a percentage of the 50K that you put down, it's a pretty good return on investment. It's better than any bank will ever pay you. But meanwhile, the property you can put a tenant in there and you can gather yield for that. In other words, the tenant's paying you rent every month, a dividend. Now you take that rent and you pay the bank their share on the mortgage, but at the current rate of interest being so low at the moment, typically the rent you make is far in excess of your costs. So you get a little bit of profit. But the key here, and this is where it worked for me, is you take that additional profit and you apply it to the principal on the mortgage. And the goal is that you pay that sucker off in 5 or 10 years. Mm-hmm. As you increase your amount of equity, what you own of that piece of property, you can then go back to the bank, assuming that interest rates are still hospitable, which they probably will be for a while. And you can borrow against your property, cash money out of it, and use it as a down payment for another property. And you can scale this. And over the course of maybe 5 or 6 years, you could probably do what I did and you own 20 or 25 properties, and the tenants are paying them off. So if you're willing to just let that roll for, say, 10 or 15 years, with that model continuously working, 10 or 15 years from now, you'll own 20 or 25 rent-generating properties that you don't owe anything on, and for the rest of your life, you can live off the rent. Now, here's the really cool thing about that. Rents go up with inflation. So if your costs to live go up because of inflation, you put your rents up, your tenants counter that. Meanwhile, because you haven't never sold a property, they're still going up in value at 4% per year. So it might be that, let's say 10, 15 years from now, you're sitting on this portfolio of rental properties where you don't have to work another day in your life at this point. Now you've got more money coming in than you can spend. And you know that going forward, you're going to be safe, because if you ever study Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're a psychology student, for example, you understand that the basic thing humanity needs to exist is food, shelter, and clothing. And you're in the shelter business. So no matter whether somebody loses their job, they're not going to stop paying their rent. Otherwise, they're on the street, right? They don't want to be on the street. So you get prioritized. That's the beauty about this. And then the nice thing is that if you do it long enough and you do have a family and you have kids, when you get to the point where most people are at a certain age and they want to retire, well, you've been retired probably for 30 years before you were retired because you were living off these rents. Well, if you decide at that point in time, I don't want to be a landlord anymore, well, you've got two options. You can either hire a property manager to look after them for you. That's one way. Or you can sell them. And when you sell them, you've had these properties for 30 odd years. They're worth an enormous amount of money. Sure, you've got to pay the tax. But after that, you've got more cash that will last you until the day you die. So you never have to worry about your retirement. You never have to worry about saving money all the time. Your property served you. When I got that message, I realized it's not what you go out there and sell your time to somebody. This is a waste. People are wasting their time doing that when all they could do is maybe do it for a short period of time to amass the down payments needed to get the rental properties. Yeah, okay, fair enough. So what you do is you do two things. You live frugally. You don't buy things you don't need, right? Mm-hmm. And then you work hard and you save the money you've got for that down payment. And you might have to do that for 5 years. Oh, poor you. 5 years, and that's the end of your career. Who wouldn't sign up for that, right? That's how people need to start thinking. It's not who you are by title or the company you work for or the car you drive that matters. It's the assets that pay you to own them that matters. If you think about it like a farmer, they've got land and they toil their crops, sow their seed, they harvest, and they enjoy the yield of the harvest. Your harvest comes first of every month when the tenant pays their rent until the day you die. And if you want, you could just keep doing that, never sell the property, give it to your kids, and for the rest of their lives, they never have to work. If you want to do that, it could be dynastic wealth. It's up to you. Now, for me, what I've done is I've taken it into another step because we have this portfolio of properties. I've been able to leverage some cash out of those properties, and now I spend half of my year, the time of the year you wouldn't want to be living in Arizona, COVID notwithstanding, but when you can travel, I spend half of my year traveling the world, and I pick up real estate opportunities. I just bought a crazy thing. I just bought an acre of land in central Mexico in the most beautiful place on the planet. It is a bullfighting ring. It's a matador school, and I bought it because nobody wanted it, and I put together a team of guys to demo the bullfighting ring and return it back to land. And I'm building the most beautiful home in that area, and it's idyllic. And I bought it at pennies on the dollar. And I found a way to buy this massive amount of land and then subdivide what I didn't need, sell that off, and that paid for the entire land acquisition. It cost me nothing. See, if I had the time to go out there and do that, I find the opportunities. I get my time back because I'm not selling it to a boss for a 40 or a 50-hour-a-week commitment until the day I die, right? That's a contrarian. We do the opposite of everybody else. So when, it's funny, I get asked to be on a lot of these kind of interview shows like podcasts. A lot of them are people in the personal financial industry. They're the bankers. And they say to me, well, what should I invest in? I'm like, well, how about you invest in yourself? How about you quit your job and you go out there and you realize that the buck stops on your desk and invest in yourself? That's how you become happy. And there's one last thing I will add to the whole thing, something I learned early on. And I didn't understand it until somehow a few years ago I kind of connected the dots on this. One of the things, back to that little dinner I had with my daughter's friends at college where they didn't know what they wanted to do. And they were kind of asking me, well, what should I do? What's my purpose? I said, well, your purpose is to go and find out what your purpose is. That's what you need to be doing. Before you commit to anything, go out and travel the world for a bit, learn who you are, understand what your purpose is, what makes you happy. And then I went down this psychological experiment of understanding what makes people happy. And what I learned was I studied entropy, which is the concept that anything in the universe eventually turns to dust, right? It's a basic premise of we'll live with. And I realized that's our life. We're biological organisms that will have a life expectancy, and eventually we all will turn to dust. And if you buy something and you don't attend to it, it will turn to dust. I'm sure, all around you, you see history and you see buildings decaying for lack of attention and so on. And I realized that there's two things in the world that make people happy deep down. And it's not an ego thing. It's just something that's in our DNA as human species. And that is the fight against entropy. If you do one of two things in your life, or you can do both, it doesn't really matter, but if you do one of two things in your life, you will be happy forevermore. Attend to things so they do not decay, or combat entropy by creating something. Because when you create something, you fight entropy right down to the core. And the one thing that is most noteworthy with us as human beings, why is it that when we all go and see our friends may have had a baby, right? And you go to their house and you see the newborn baby, and we all feel warm inside, right? We love babies. We love new birth. Why is that? Because it fights entropy. Because we're sticking our middle finger up to entropy. We're saying, my biological lifespan might go away, but you can't take this one. This one's come in and we're fighting you down to the ground, universe. We're going to tell you that we don't go down without a fight, and our species is here to stay. And that makes us feel happy. Why is it when people retire from their jobs, and if they have a job, they have a career, a very common thing I find, particularly here in Arizona, is you get all these old guys who get together and they restore old muscle cars, right? They go back they buy that old 70s Chevelle or a Mustang or something, and they get in there and they're all together and they get in, they work it out and they source all the parts and they put the thing back online, and it's the celebration of the car. They go to the car shows and they show their friends and, all this stuff. And they love it.
Yes.
It's fighting entropy. They are showing the world that car will not turn to dust on their watch, right? Those things matter. Whether you're creating something new or you're attending to something so it does not decay, if you do those things, you will be very, very happy in life.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Like paying attention to situations so they don't decay, and being creative also to fight entropy.
Yeah, and interpret that in whatever model you want. If you're an artist and you create new paintings, you're doing it, right? If you're an artist who restores old paintings, you're doing it. But I guarantee if you're somebody who destroys things, it might be that initial adrenaline rush you get for doing that. But it won't last very long. It certainly won't make you very happy.
True. That's very true. And talking about being creative, you shared a lot about your life story already with me, and I'm so grateful for that. I will encourage everyone who is listening and who has listened so far to check out your podcast, the Unconstrained podcast. It's available on all platforms. I'm going to place a link in the show notes of this episode. So I encourage everyone to click on it and listen to over 130 episodes of wonderful, insight that takes us on a journey towards financial independence and being unconstrained in every area of our lives. Like we've learned a lot from you today, and I can't imagine the amount of information and wisdom that we'll get from listening to over 130 episodes that you are releasing, and even more that are even coming in the next 2 weeks and in the next years. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Like, there's one thing I still want us to talk about, and that's your upcoming book. And you talk about the success on, rental real estate. So when should we be expecting this book? And are there some things we are supposed to look out for in this upcoming book?
I was planning on it being out this year. What ended up happening was I got sidetracked and I did an audio course on rental real estate specific to that. And a lot of that was driven by the fact that right now real estate's a real hot topic. So I ended up doing 15 hours of audio training, and I put the book aside while I was doing it. So now the course is finished. I'm just in the final stages of doing the production on the audio. So that'll be out in the next couple of weeks. But the book will follow, hopefully, when I say shortly after, I'm saying within maybe 3 months or so of the course. So that's I have to get back to it. But yeah, I underestimated just how much work it is writing a book, writing a decent book. I don't write pamphlets. These are 300 odd pages of information. So it takes a lot of work to make sure I did it right.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, so we are going to be looking forward to the book. I'm going to place the link to your website in the show notes of this episode too, so people could stay up to date with the audio that's coming out very soon, and also the book that will come out shortly afterwards. But for someone out there who still has questions, that maybe the person has listened to your story so far up to this moment and still has some questions that we are not able to touch because of time, what's the best way to connect and work with you or get across to you just to ask you questions?
One of the things that's actually happened by me telling these stories is I didn't realize how well it resonates with people, whether or not they have the same feelings I had about jobs or about future and how they live their lives. And what happened was by nature, it built a community around the idea of being unconstrained. And the whole concept of that, I put up a matrix server, which is an open source, federated and private communication platform, very much like Discord, but without it being owned and controlled by a big mega corporation or central authority. So we host it ourselves. I have my own servers in a data center. I host that. Our matrix server, you can get to it through our website at beunconstrained.com. So if you go to beunconstrained.com, there's a link there called community. And if people want to go to that community link, it'll tell them how they can log into the matrix server and participate with us there. It's one of these really nice technologies where you can get it's like phone apps or desktop apps for it, but there's a web version of it as well. So you can be communicating with me and everybody else on the community in real time through our matrix server. It's been really, really popular. So I would encourage people to try it out. It's free. Just go in there and sign up, and I think it might need a login ID and a password. That's about it, and then you're in. And you'll find rooms of all different topic areas. And just don't be afraid to introduce yourself. Have a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Myles. I really appreciate everything that I was able to learn from you today. Like, your journey, your life journey is like very inspiring to me and to other people out there, I'm sure. To become financially sustainable in terms of, investing and also working on oneself. Like you said, that's my key. That's what I'm taking home with this, from this episode, actually, like working on myself, developing on myself. Like, you didn't have to go to college because you worked on yourself, because you did a task to explore that God-given talent that is in you, to bring out that, the gift that is in you. And I really appreciate that motivation that I got from your story. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Wow, you made it to the very end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm grateful for your time, your love, and your contributions. Subscribe, like, review, and share this podcast. God bless you. Bye.